From Google Images or any other image you choose to paint, this is a really easy and fast way to transfer your image to your painting surface. In order to use this method of printing, you will need to have a good understanding of your very own printer and how it works and your own photo editing software. I am using Photoshop Elements, which is an older version. You should also know how to size your own images and to crop. So this is experience you should have under your belt before you get started. Okay, number 1, select your image. And this particular image is of Point Lobos that I shot on a trip up there last year. And open it up in your photo editing software as I have. Now number 2, how big do you want to print this? And know that, of course, regular printer paper is 8.5 by 11. But no, you don't have to print at that size. You can print smaller or larger. And if you're going smaller, you could just cut off the extra paper around your print. But if you're going larger than 8.5 by 11, you're going to be printing in sections. So let's get started. Open your image in the editor, which it is, and then go to print. And I have put, I have watercolor paper that is 9 by 12 inches. So I put my height as 9 inches, and it's a little bit over 12 here. The other thing I want to recommend is that you take the image off of center, because if you keep it on center, you won't have the ability to move your image about. Okay, so just to show you how to do this again, I'm going to reduce the size of this by pulling the corner, and here's my image. For a single picture, this is really great. And to center it, it would be centered here. To uncenter it, unclick it, and now I want this to be 9 inches tall, and it gives me 12.16 wide. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and print one side and go to my printer preferences. And since this is just a draft, I'm using my cheapest setting, which is plain paper and fast. And now let's go over to send this over to the printer. This is not an expensive printer. It's a Canon printer, which is a home office printer. Okay, that gives me one piece, but it's blown up. Now what I'm going to do is to take it, go to File again, and Print, and then I'm going to take part of this, kind of get a landmark on where I am, and drag this over, and I've got plenty of room. So I know how much I need to print, and then print again. And I've already done it on this other copy. And then I scotch tape the two of them together. So you can see that I have a little bit of a border here, but I scotch tape these with a non-glossy scotch tape. And then I've got my whole image together there. When you're done, you can cut off any excess of the back of this, and I'll show you in a little bit why. So again, just to review, you want to get it off of center, and to make sure you've got the size of your watercolor paper. make sure you know how to do a little cropping, and I'm going to cancel this. So if I wanted a little bit of a change, say I wanted this much, I could crop that. And that's maybe all I want in my painting. File, print, and my paper size is still going to be 9 inches tall and 12. And then just use your cursor to move it around and print in 2 sections. Okay, remember your own individual printer and your own software is going to be so different than perhaps mine, so you need to get to know it. And now we're going to take the show upstairs to my studio, and I'm going to show you part 2. Be back in a minute. Okay, now the next step is getting your photograph to get transferred onto your watercolor paper. And I'm using a Canson paper, which is an inexpensive watercolor paper, but it's good for our purposes for marker. And this is 9 by 12 inches. And I've taken a piece of masonite or a board, and I've taped it, and I'll go ahead and tape it just on the last side. I want to overlap by about 1/4 of an inch. And then you could take your fingernail or some object and crimp the side of the paper. Sometimes I use this little plastic kitchen tool, and I just want to make sure that I've got a good bind along that edge so that it doesn't lift when I wet it. Next, you saw downstairs when I had taken the drawing and blew it up. Now I'm going to go ahead and get this ready to transfer my image. So I'm going to turn it backwards. And I have some excess over here. It's a good idea for me to cut off that excess. And I'll go get a scissors. 1 second, please.
Edit it out.
And I'm going to cut this just right here along the edge. The reason is that it's just going to get in the way when it comes down to my transferring. So now I'm going to take a scrap piece of paper, turn this over. So I'm going to use the back side. And the graphite stick that I asked you to buy is basically pencil lead. And we don't use lead any longer, but it's still whatever is inside of a pencil. And what I want you to do is coat the back of this. And you want to use the surface that's flat, so I turn this over. You have a little bit better look. Now you can see where the seam is. That's why I cut off that extra paper. So what you've done is created, or are in the process of creating, a piece of carbon paper. Some people, young people, don't know what carbon paper is. And it used to be used for just about every office duplication that was there. Okay, so I've got a good coat of the graphite on this. This is a number 6B. I'm going to take a Kleenex, plain old Kleenex tissue, and I'm running on light circles, and I'm coating the back a little bit. Just kind of filling in the gaps. Now I'll explain why I do this. Okay, so I've filled this all in, and then I'm going to give it another application pretty good. So the next step is to get the graphite off your hands and go back to your watercolor paper. And I'm going to match my corners, position the paper where I want it on my watercolor paper. And I'm going to put a hinge of tape along the top. So this way I can transfer my image and go back underneath and check as I go. Now I'm going to take a number 2B pencil or an HB, and I'm going to press down along the image, and I've got a mark underneath it. I'm doing a fast placement. I'm not copying verbatim, and I can make changes as I want. Later on you can also make some changes. But what this is for is to help you get something down quickly instead of spending hours doing a drawing. Now, this does not replace drawing and learning how to draw, and it doesn't help you in terms of your spatial skills or anything, but it is much faster. And I want you to see how quick I'm going. I'm thinking about outer shapes and inner shapes, but mostly the outer, and what the textures are. And every so often kind of look underneath, make sure you're getting a good application. Okay, I'm going to leave the tree and go out here to the horizon. It is a really good idea if you have a T-square, which I do. If you're doing a horizon, make sure it's horizontal. So that helps things out. And I'll move on to the major shapes. And I'll do one more rock and so on. This was an area that early California painters fell in love with, just like we all do when we go to see Central Coast. It is just so beautiful. And many painters worked up there. And still do. So I'm just thinking about shapes. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm not counting how many bumps of sand or grass or anything, and so on. Okay, I would do this for the entire drawing, and I'm going to lift that up for now. And let's assume at this point that the entire drawing is finished. Quite a bit of graphite gets left on this surface. So if you have one of these in your closet or even in your house, it's a lint roller. And this takes off any extra graphite that's laying around on the drawing. I find it kind of helpful. If you don't have one, that's okay. You can dust it off a little bit with a Kleenex and try not to spread it into the paper. Okay, now that I've got that done, And don't remove this until your drawing is complete. I can come in now and make changes as I choose to. Maybe I want the shape of the rock to be higher. Maybe I want this to be a hill. I can make any of those changes I want at this point. So that's the method. And then, of course, the other way of doing it is freehanding. So I hope you enjoyed learning about this process and what it does for you and how much speed it, or how much faster it'll be to get your image reproduced. Okay, thanks.